We're counting down 25 forgotten blackout meals Americans made before freezers and microwaves changed everything. These were the dishes that carried families through the Great Depression, wartime rationing, and long nights when the streetlights went dark and air raid wardens walked the block. From meals that stretched a single can across a week to cakes baked with no eggs, no butter, and no milk, each entry tells a story of hunger, thrift, and the quiet genius of the American kitchen. Number 9 fed more soldiers than any dish in history. Number 3 was baked without a single egg, and nobody could taste the difference. And number 1 was so common that an entire generation still remembers it by a nickname we can't say on this channel. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what your grandparents knew. Let's begin with number 25. Number 25. Milk toast. Long before microwaves reheated leftovers in 90 seconds, milk toast was the meal you made when there was almost nothing left in the icebox. A housewife toasted a slice of day-old bread, laid it in a bowl, dotted it with a knob of butter and a whisper of salt, then poured hot milk over the top until the bread went soft and warm. For a few pennies, it fed a sick child, an old man with no teeth, or a family waiting on payday. In the 1930s, when a quart of milk cost around a dime, milk toast was the gentlest kind of supper, warm, filling, and easy on an empty stomach. Mothers made it by lamplight during blackout drills, when the shades were drawn and the kitchen glowed low. It asked for nothing but bread, milk, and patience, and it never let a hungry child go to bed with nothing. Number 24. Fried cornmeal mush. Before boxed cereal and toaster waffles, breakfast in a poor American home often started the night before. A mother boiled cornmeal into a thick porridge, poured it into a loaf pan, and set it in the cold pantry to firm up overnight. Come morning, she sliced the stiff mush into slabs and fried them in a little bacon grease until the edges turned golden crisp. Drizzled with sorghum molasses or a thin cane syrup, it filled a child before a long walk to school. A pound of cornmeal cost only a few cents and stretched across a week of mornings. In the South and the Midwest alike, fried mush was the taste of making something from almost nothing. The crackle of the crust, the sweetness of the syrup, the warmth against a cold kitchen. It was humble, but it was breakfast, and no one questioned it. Number 23. Dandelion greens. When the ration book ran thin and the garden hadn't come in yet, Americans did what their immigrant grandparents had always done. They went out to the yard and picked their supper. Dandelion greens, gathered young before the flowers turned bitter, were washed, boiled, and dressed with a little bacon fat, vinegar, and salt. What grew as a weed became a plate of tender greens, rich in iron and vitamins, free for the taking from any fence line or vacant lot. During the Depression, whole families foraged along railroad tracks and empty fields, filling flour sacks with dandelions, lamb's quarters, and wild onion. It cost nothing but a bent back and an afternoon. Old-timers remember the sharp green bite, softened by the salty pork fat, and the quiet pride of setting food on the table that the land had given for free. Nothing edible went to waste, not even the weeds. Number 22. Poor man's onion pie. When meat was scarce and money scarcer, a humble onion could become the center of the meal. A housewife sliced onions thin, cooked them slow in a little butter or drippings until sweet and golden, then folded them into a simple custard of egg and milk and poured the whole thing into a pastry shell. Baked until the top browned and the center set, poor man's onion pie fed a family for pennies. Onions kept for months in a cool cellar without any refrigeration, making them a reliable staple through the winter when little else was fresh. The smell of onions slowly caramelizing filled the kitchen on cold nights, warm and comforting even when the pantry was near empty. served in thick wedges with whatever bread was on hand. It proved that a good cook could turn the cheapest bulb in the bin into something that tasted almost like a luxury. Number 21. Tomato gravy over biscuits. In the South, when the smokehouse was empty and payday was still days off, tomato gravy stretched a can of tomatoes into a filling supper. A cook made a roux of flour and bacon grease, whisked in home-canned tomatoes or a cheap tin from the store, seasoned it with salt and plenty of black pepper, and let it bubble into a thick, tangy gravy. Ladled hot over split biscuits, it turned flour and fat into a meal that stuck to your ribs. Families who put up their own tomatoes each summer had jars lining the cellar shelves, insurance against the lean months when nothing grew. Children mopped their plates with the last of the biscuit, chasing every drop of the bright red gravy. It cost almost nothing, used what the garden and the pig had already provided, and warmed a house full of hungry mouths on the coldest mornings of the year. Number 20. Stewed prunes and prune whip. Long before freezers held bags of frozen berries, dried fruit was how Americans kept sweetness in the house year-round. Prunes, cheap and shelf-stable, were simmered soft in water with a little sugar and a strip of lemon peel, then served warm as a humble dessert or breakfast. For company, a thrifty cook folded the stewed fruit into beaten egg whites to make prune whip, a light, airy pudding baked until it puffed and browned, tasting far grander than its penny's worth of ingredients suggested. Prunes needed no icebox and lasted for months in the pantry, making them a reliable treat through winter and wartime alike. Doctors even recommended them, and mothers pressed them on children for their health. The soft, dark sweetness, the faint tang of lemon, the way a bowl of prunes could feel like a small indulgence in hard times. It was thrift dressed up as dessert. Number 19. Vinegar pie. It sounds like a mistake, but vinegar pie was one of the cleverest desserts of hard times America. When there were no lemons to be had, too expensive, out of season, or simply gone from the shelves during rationing, a resourceful cook reached for the vinegar bottle instead. A splash of apple cider vinegar mixed into a custard of sugar, flour, eggs, and water mimicked the bright tang of lemon, baked into a pie that tasted shockingly close to the real thing. It cost mere pennies and used only what every kitchen already had. Pioneer women had made it for generations, and Depression cooks revived it when citrus became a luxury. Children never guessed the secret, tasting only sweet and tart in a flaky crust. Vinegar pie was proof of a truth every thrifty cook lived by. With a little imagination, you could fake almost anything, even a lemon you couldn't afford. Number 18. Water pie. If vinegar pie sounds desperate, water pie sounds impossible, and yet it fed families when the icebox held nothing but a stick of butter and a bag of flour. The recipe was exactly what it sounds like. Water poured into a pie shell, thickened with flour and sugar, dotted with butter, sprinkled with vanilla and nutmeg, then baked slowly until the whole thing set into a trembling custard-like sweet. As it cooked, the flour and butter worked a small miracle, turning plain water into a golden filling that sliced clean and tasted rich. Born in the leanest days of the Depression, water pie was dessert conjured from nearly nothing, a sweet ending to a supper that had cost almost nothing at all. Families who lived through those years remembered it not with shame, but with a strange pride, proof that even with empty cupboards, a mother could still put pie on the table. Number 17. Corn oysters. They contained no oysters at all, but that was the point. When the real thing was far too dear, cooks whipped fresh corn kernels into a batter of egg and flour and fried spoonfuls in hot fat until they puffed golden and crisp. The little fritters were said to taste faintly of the sea, hence the hopeful name. And they turned a few ears of summer corn into a supper that felt almost fancy. During the Depression and the war years, corn was one of the cheapest, most abundant crops in America, grown in every victory garden and sold by the sackful. A dozen corn oysters could stretch a single cob into a plateful. Crisp outside, sweet and tender within, they were the kind of small pleasure that made a hard week bearable. Children ate them by the handful, never once missing the oyster that was never there. Number 16. Welsh rarebit. On a night when there was no meat in the house, a wedge of cheese could carry the whole family. Welsh rarebit, sometimes called Welsh rabbit, though no rabbit ever went near it, was melted cheese loosened with a little milk, a spoon of mustard, and often a splash of beer, poured hot over toast until it bubbled. For pennies worth of aging cheese and stale bread, a cook could set down a rich, savory supper that felt indulgent on a cold, blackout evening. Cheese kept well in a cool pantry, and a small block went a long way when stretched this way. The dish had crossed the ocean generations before and settled comfortably into American kitchens as a Sunday night standby. The smell of sharp cheese melting, the crunch of toast beneath the molten gold. It was comfort food born of scarcity, dressed up with a fancy foreign name. Number 15. Salmon croquettes. Before freezers made fresh fish available year-round, a humble can of salmon was a pantry treasure in kitchens far from any coast. A cook mashed the canned fish, bones, skin, and all, for nothing was wasted. Mixed it with a beaten egg, cracker crumbs, or leftover mashed potato, and a little onion. Then shaped the mix into patties and fried them crisp in a hot skillet. Canned salmon was cheap, kept for years on the shelf, and delivered protein when meat was rationed or simply too expensive. A single can could feed a family of 5, especially stretched with potato and served alongside greens. The golden, crackling crust gave way to soft, savory fish inside, and children who turned up their noses at plain fish devoured the croquettes gladly. It was thrift and nourishment fried into a single patty, a taste that generations of Americans still remember from Friday suppers. Number 14. Scrapple. On the farms of Pennsylvania and out across the mid-Atlantic, nothing about the hog was ever thrown away, and scrapple was the proof. After butchering, the odds and ends of the pig were simmered until tender, the meat picked from the bones, and the rich broth thickened with cornmeal and flour into a mush seasoned with sage and pepper. Poured into loaf pans and left to set in the cold pantry, it sliced into slabs that were fried crisp for breakfast. Scrapple turned the parts of the animal that others discarded into a hearty, savory meal that fueled farmers through freezing mornings. A single hog could yield enough to feed a family for weeks, costing next to nothing beyond the labor. Crisp and brown outside, soft and spiced within, often eaten with syrup or apple butter. Scrapple was frugality made delicious, a dish that honored the old rule that waste was the only real sin. Number 13. Saturday night baked beans. In New England and far beyond, Saturday supper meant a heavy pot of beans, baking low and slow all day long. Dried navy beans, soaked overnight, were layered with salt pork, molasses, and a spoon of mustard, then set in the oven to bubble for hours until the beans turned soft and the sauce went dark and sweet. Served with brown bread steamed in a coffee can, it was a meal that cost mere pennies and fed a crowd. Beans were the ultimate thrift food, dried. They kept indefinitely without any icebox, and a pound could feed a family several times over. The tradition ran back to Puritan days, when no cooking was done on the Sabbath, so the beans baked Saturday and stretched into Sunday. The smell of molasses and pork filling the house all afternoon meant warmth, plenty, and the comfort of a supper that asked only for time and a low fire. Number 12. Hoover stew. Named bitterly for the president, many blamed for the Depression, Hoover stew was the taste of the breadline and the shantytown. It began with whatever was cheapest and most plentiful: macaroni boiled soft, a can of stewed tomatoes, and a few sliced hot dogs or scraps of whatever meat could be found, all simmered together into a thin, filling stew. In the Hoovervilles that sprang up on the edges of every city, families in soup kitchens cooked it by the potful, stretching a handful of ingredients to feed as many mouths as showed up. It cost almost nothing and asked no skill, only the desperate arithmetic of feeding a family on nearly empty pockets. The name carried anger, but the dish carried survival. For millions of Americans in the 1930s, a bowl of Hoover stew was the difference between going to bed fed or going to bed hungry, plain, hot, and just enough. Number 11. Liver and onions. Liver was the cut the butcher nearly gave away, and thrifty American cooks knew exactly what to do with it. Sliced thin and dredged in seasoned flour, it was fried fast in a hot pan and smothered under a heap of onions, cooked slow and sweet, then served with mashed potatoes and gravy. For a few cents a pound, liver delivered more iron and vitamins than a steak that cost 10 times as much, and mothers pressed it on their children for exactly that reason. During the war, when muscle cuts were rationed and points were precious, organ meats like liver required no ration stamps at all, making them a patriotic bargain. Children wrinkled their noses at the strong mineral smell, but parents insisted on clean plates. The sizzle of liver hitting the pan, the sweetness of the onions. It was a supper that nourished a generation, whether they liked it or not. Number 10. Ham hock and navy bean soup. When the ham was long gone, its bone still had one more meal to give. A housewife dropped a smoky ham hock or the picked-over bone into a pot with dried navy beans, an onion, and water, then let it simmer for hours until the beans went creamy and the broth turned rich with pork and marrow. It was a supper built entirely on scraps, the parts of the animal too humble for the Sunday table, transformed by long, slow cooking into something deeply satisfying. Dried beans cost pennies and kept forever in the pantry, and a single ham bone could flavor an entire pot. Served with cornbread to sop up the broth, it filled a family on the coldest nights for almost nothing. The smell of beans and smoked pork simmering all afternoon was the smell of a house where nothing was ever wasted, and no one went to bed hungry. Number 9. Spam and its many disguises. No single food defines the wartime American kitchen like the little blue can of Spam. Introduced by Hormel in 1937, this canned pork shoulder needed no refrigeration, kept for years, and when the war came, fed both the home front and the troops overseas by the millions of cans. Housewives fried it in slices for breakfast, baked it studded with cloves like a tiny ham, ground it into sandwich spread, cubed it into casseroles, and dropped it into fried rice. Soldiers grumbled about eating it 3 times a day, but back home it was a reliable, affordable protein when fresh meat was scarce and rationed. A single can stretched across several meals with enough imagination. Loved, mocked, and utterly indispensable, Spam was the taste of American ingenuity in a can, the meat that never spoiled and never quit. Number 8. Mock apple pie. Perhaps the most famous trick in the American thrift kitchen, mock apple pie contained no apples at all. When fruit was out of season or too costly, a clever cook broke plain crackers into a pie shell, poured over a syrup of sugar, water, cream of tartar and cinnamon, dotted it with butter, and baked it golden. As it cooked, the crackers softened and soaked up the spiced syrup, and the cream of tartar lent a tartness so convincing that people swore they were eating real apples. The recipe went back to the pioneers and roared back to life during the Depression, even printed on the cracker boxes themselves. It cost a fraction of a real fruit pie and used only pantry staples that never spoiled. Served warm, no one at the table could tell the difference. Mock apple pie was the ultimate proof that in the American kitchen, even an apple could be faked. Number 7. Red flannel hash. Hash was how Monday made use of Sunday, and red flannel hash was its most colorful form. Leftover corned beef, boiled potatoes, and the secret ingredient, chopped beets, were all diced fine, pressed into a hot greased skillet, and fried until a dark, crispy crust formed on the bottom. The beets stained the whole thing a deep, ruddy red, giving the dish its homespun name. Topped with a fried egg, it turned the tail ends of a boiled dinner into a breakfast or supper that felt like a fresh meal rather than a repeat. Nothing from the previous night's table was wasted. Every scrap of meat and vegetable found its way into the pan. The crackle of the crust, the sweetness of the beets, the runny yolk pooling over the top. Red flannel hash was thrift turned into something families actually looked forward to. A second life for leftovers that tasted better than the first. Number 6. Chicken and dumpling. A single stewing hen, too old and tough to roast, could feed a whole family when a good cook knew how to stretch it. Simmered for hours with an onion and a few carrots until the meat fell from the bone, the bird gave up a rich golden broth. Into that pot went dumplings, nothing but flour, fat, and a little milk, dropped by the spoonful, or rolled and cut into strips, swelling as they cooked and soaking up the savory stock. The dumplings did the heavy lifting, filling bellies on cheap flour when the meat alone would never have been enough. It was Sunday dinner comfort built on the humblest of birds, common from the farmhouses of the South to the tenements of the North. The smell of chicken simmering all afternoon promised warmth and plenty, and the pot fed everyone at the table with enough left over for the next day. Number 5. Depression meatloaf. When a pound of ground beef had to feed 6, the American cook reached for a handful of tricks to make it stretch. Oatmeal, breadcrumbs, or crushed crackers soaked in milk were mixed into the meat, doubling the loaf's size while keeping it moist, and seasoned with onion, a beaten egg, and a smear of ketchup across the top. Baked in a loaf pan, it sliced into neat portions that made a little meat look like a lot. During rationing, when every ounce of beef came at the cost of precious points, these fillers weren't just thrifty, they were patriotic, praised in government pamphlets as a way to feed a family while sparing meat for the troops. Served with mashed potatoes and gravy, Depression. Meatloaf became the definition of American home cooking. The trick our grandmothers used to make 1 pound feed the whole table is the same one that turned meatloaf into a national comfort. Number 4. Icebox cake. Before the freezer made ice cream a nightly possibility, the icebox worked a quiet magic on dessert. A cook layered plain chocolate wafers or lady fingers with sweetened whipped cream, stacked them into a loaf or round, and set the whole thing in the icebox overnight. As it chilled, the cookies drank in the moisture from the cream and softened into a tender cake-like dessert. No oven, no baking, no fuel required on a hot summer day. It was an elegant trick that turned a box of cookies and a little cream into a company-worthy dessert for pennies. During the sweltering months, when lighting the oven was unthinkable, the icebox cake let a housewife serve something impressive without breaking a sweat. Sliced to reveal its neat layers, cool and creamy, it felt like a treat from a fancy bakery. It was proof that even without a freezer, an American kitchen could make magic from a cold box, and patience. Number 3. Wacky cake. Also called crazy cake or depression cake. This was the dessert that broke every rule and worked anyway, with eggs, butter, and milk all rationed or too expensive, a resourceful baker mixed flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, and salt right in the pan, then made 3 little wells and poured in oil, vinegar, and vanilla before stirring in water. No eggs, no butter, no milk, no bowl to wash, and yet it baked up into a moist, tender chocolate cake that tasted as rich as any made the old-fashioned way. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda to give it lift, a bit of kitchen chemistry that stunned anyone who tasted it. Born of pure necessity in the 1930s and revived through the war, wacky cake let families celebrate a birthday even when the pantry was nearly bare. Nobody at the party could have guessed it was made without a single egg, and that was the whole point. Number 2. Cornbread and buttermilk. It was barely a recipe, and yet it was supper for millions. A wedge of cold cornbread, crumbled into a tall glass of buttermilk and eaten with a spoon. That was the whole meal. And across the rural South, it fed farmers and children alike when there was little else in the house. The cornbread, baked in a cast-iron skillet from cheap cornmeal, and the buttermilk, left over from churning butter, cost almost nothing and used what every farm kitchen already had. Eaten on the porch on a hot evening or by lamplight during a blackout, it was cooling, filling, and strangely satisfying. Old-timers spoke of it with deep affection, the simple tang of the buttermilk against the crumbly sweetness of the corn. It was the humblest supper imaginable, a dish so plain it never made the cookbooks. And yet for a whole generation of Americans, it tasted like home. Number 1. Creamed chipped beef on toast. And in first place, the dish an entire generation of American servicemen and families knew by a nickname too salty for this channel. Thin slices of cheap, salted, dried beef were rinsed, then folded into a simple white sauce of flour, butter, and milk, seasoned with plenty of black pepper, and ladled hot over toast. For pennies, it made a rich, savory, sticks-to-your-ribs meal out of almost nothing. A little dried beef went a very long way once it was creamed and spread over bread. It fed families through the Depression, when a small package of chipped beef was one of the cheapest proteins at the store. And it fed millions of soldiers in mess halls throughout the war, becoming so universal that GIs gave it its infamous nickname. Loved by some, groaned at by others, it was the ultimate blackout supper, warm, filling, and made from a pantry that never needed a freezer or a microwave to keep it going. Long after the war ended, grown men and women still made it at home, and one taste carried them straight back to the kitchens of their childhood. 25 blackout meals were more than recipes. They were survival, ingenuity, and love served on a plate, made in kitchens with no freezer, no microwave, and often no money to spare. Our grandparents fed whole families on pennies and made even the leanest cupboard feel like plenty. Which of these did your family make? Tell me in the comments, and let me know which one you'd bring back to your own table. Your grandparents knew. Now you do too.